Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Bridget and I love making art and I hope it inspires you to make some too. This painting is the first of a new series I'm starting based off of a panorama photograph I took of a sunset over the lake. I loved the clouds and the gradient of the colors in the sky, so that's what I'll be focusing on in this video, as well as painting some rocks and grass. I'm using oil paint and the whole thing is painted with the wet on wet technique, which means I'm painting with wet paint on a wet surface. Wet doesn't mean water in this case, wet means oil. First, I add my background colors, which are the sky colors, which I've pre-mixed on my palette. I begin with the white in the brightest part of my painting, adding light blue to the top, lavender to the side, and some light pink on the bottom. I use several brushes to blend the different parts. That way my colors don't get muddy and I can be more precise with my blending. I use smaller brushes for smaller parts and big brushes to cover larger areas. I try to paint a straight line where the water and sky meet, using the canvas grooves as a guide. For the water, I use a bit of phthalo blue and Naples yellow to create a greener blue, or one that is distinguished from the sky. The clouds are what drew me to take a photo to begin with, so I want to make sure I get those clouds just right. I've kept my brush strokes light and well blended as the clouds fade into the rest of the sky. I use a small, thin brush to define some shapes, being intentional not to paint too far into the blended clouds. At first, I use the same lavender color, and then I use some light pinks to paint the light clouds. Notice I'm not using any white or yellow for the clouds. Oftentimes, when we want to paint light, we want to use white or yellow, even if that's not what we are actually seeing. I always say to look at your reference closely and try to see the colors that are actually there and not the colors that you think you should use. Most of this cloud work is playing with form and brushstroke. Form is another word for shape. The shape of the clouds matter, and their shapes are not ones that we are used to seeing. When we think of clouds, we don't normally think of the long pointy shapes or ones that blend into the expanse of the sky as far as the eye can see. But that's what these clouds are doing. So I constantly switch between a pointed detail brush and a rounded, wider blending brush with softer bristles. Normally for oil paint, I would recommend firm or coarse bristles, but since I'm not using very thick paint, and since I don't want to see the brush strokes, I use a lighter, softer brush to blend out those lines. Sometimes you'll want those brush lines, but I want these clouds to appear soft and fluffy and blend into the rest of the painting, almost as if you are actually there looking at them in person. For most of the clouds, I'm using the same shade of lavender. You'll notice that the clouds on the lighter parts of the painting look a lot darker and bolder. This is not actually the case, it's an illusion. Because I know the eye interprets the colors in this way, I need to take that into consideration as I paint them. If I want them to look the same as the rest of the other clouds, I might add a bit of white to the palette and mix it into the lavender before I paint it on the canvas. Or I might keep it the same color and work with the illusion instead. The key to making soft clouds is working with a wet background. That way you can blend the clouds into the background to create a fluffy, barely there effect. If the background is dry, this is much harder to do. For the rocks, I have left a bit of unpainted canvas. This way I can control what color the rocks are a lot better than if I had wet paint underneath. I begin with a light gray, which I've made using titanium white, raw umber, and a bit of phthalo blue. Whenever I make a gray or light color, I use titanium white first as a base, and then I add very small increments of the other colors. This way I can control the color a lot better. I do this because it's easier to go darker than lighter, much like with hair dye or with clothing dye. For the rocks, I'm following my reference photo closely. Rocks can easily become jelly bean-like or hairy if you're not careful. I'm paying attention to where the shadows are and where the highlights are. I'm using a small brush so I can better control my color and shape. Each rock takes time and lots of blending and painting and blending and painting. For a more cohesive look to the painting, I try to bring some of the sky colors into the lake and some of the lake colors into the rocks. That way each section will look like it all belongs in the same universe or the same picture. For the grass, I'm using an old, dry brush. one where the bristles are somewhat divided and spread apart. This way, the bristles will create the individual blades of wild grass. The wet on wet technique really helps here and does a lot of the work for me. The bristles will have the dark raw umber on it already and catch the white gray with each flick. With this flick technique, it's hard to be precise. Thankfully, precision with these blades of wild grass isn't really necessary. I try to keep the blades and brush strokes going in the same direction, but also creating several small bushy groups to make it look more natural, rather than a perfectly even distribution. Not every blade needs to be super defined, and it's okay if they blend into each other a little bit. And that's how I made the first painting in my ongoing series of this lake panorama. If you liked this video or found it informative and helpful, give it a like. Comment if you have any questions or what you want to see next, and subscribe to my channel. It's free, and click the bell icon if you want to be notified every time I upload. Thanks for watching!